Hey everyone, my name is Maya Brochu, and today I'm here to talk about the link between hypertension and plant-based diets. So let's get right into it. For starters, what do you think of when you think of the average American diet? Do you think of a lot of the foods shown on your screen right now? Like you see a lot of classic fast food items. You see the cheeseburger, hot dogs, bacon, pizza, milkshakes, fries, soda, steak, all of that, right? That's what a lot of people associate with the average American diet. So we know the slideshow today is going to be mostly based on hypertension and heart disease. So what are the components of these foods that might contribute to hypertension? Okay, so when we look at the classic American diet, this table nicely encapsulates what we're going to be talking about. So we see high saturated fat, low fiber, high sodium, and then high red meat content. High saturated fat you see in things like butter, and the white ridges in red meat. So what does that mean? It means LDL will transport triglycerides and cholesterol to the periphery, and you don't necessarily want that stuff in your blood vessels and arteries because that's part of the periphery. So that is a big concern with high saturated fat intake. With low fiber, high fiber is great, right? We find fiber in whole grains and fruits and vegetables. That's fantastic. But less than 5% of Americans meet their daily fiber needs, which is a concern because fiber helps excrete those bile salts and cholesterol from the body and prevents it from LDL getting its nasty little hands on it and taking it to the periphery. So we want fiber, but unfortunately, a lot of Americans are not needing fiber with their current diets. With high sodium, we see sodium everywhere, right? So, like chips and french fries, that makes them taste fantastic. And when we think of things like preservatives, sodium helps keep things and make them last longer. So, sodium can be our friend, especially when you're thinking of sodium potassium pumps in the brain and the muscles, and what makes our muscles and neurons fire, right? However, a diet high in sodium, which Americans generally overconsume sodium, causes the body to retain fluid, increasing blood pressure by exerting more pressure against arterial walls. When we're looking at red meat content, it has all three of these factors: high saturated fat, low fiber, high sodium. So, really, obviously, that's evidently not great for heart health. Okay, so you've heard me talk about heart health, blood pressure, hypertension. What does all of this mean? So, hypertension is just a blood pressure greater than 120 over 80 millimeters per mercury. This term can fluctuate depending on what sources you're looking at. 120 over 80 is the standard normal blood pressure that you want to aim for. Anything below that will be kind of low blood pressure, which is generally considered okay if you're a little bit lower. That will be considered hypotension if you're really low. A little bit higher will be high blood pressure or hypertension. Hypertension can sometimes be classified as like 140 over 90 for a measurement. That might sometimes be by medical providers, the definition of hypertension. But for this specific project, we're going to be focused on hypertension as anything greater than 120 over 80, because that would be classified as high blood pressure. So, how is blood pressure measured? Systolic would be the front number, which is 120 in this case, which is when pressure against arterial walls when the heart is actively beating. Diastolic, on the other hand, would be that backhand, like denominator number, the 80. It's when pressure against the arterial walls is happening, but the heart is at rest. So that's how you measure blood pressure. The concern with hypertension and high blood pressure is obviously if you're skirting more pressure against the arteries or blood vessels, that means that you might cause a risk of injury or inflammation, which, as I said before, blood clotting is fine if you've got it in like your knee for a scraped knee or for like a paper cut, right? You want inflammation, you want blood clotting. But if it's against blood vessels, you're going to clog things up, which increases resistance and makes it hard for blood to flow through. Okay, so before I brought up that this presentation would be about plant-based diets as it works with hypertension. So why are we looking at plants? Plants have lower saturated fat content, increased fiber content, and decreased sodium content. Some studies we'll be looking at are the DASH diet, the Cardia diet, and a phytochemical study. Okay, so let's start with the DASH diet. Plant-based eating is a new emerging field, so this is one of the older studies, even though it was only from 1997, which honestly, it feels like a long time ago. That was almost 30 years ago, right? So since then, we've evolved a lot studying, but this really is the groundwork. It stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. That's what DASH stands for. In this study, there are three groups. Control group, which is your classic American diet, fruit and vegetable group, which is your classic American diet, but with fruits and vegetables. And the third group, your DASH diet, which is also called the controlled diet, which means it's low in a lot of the stuff associated with the American diet, while also being high in fruits, vegetables, plant-based products, and low-fat dairy products. So what should you get from this diet? It was found that the DASH diet was the best diet, the combination diet as it's also called, as it reduced systolic and diastolic blood pressure by 5.5 and 3.0 milligrams mercury, more than the control group being the classic American diet. So what it really emphasizes is that fruits and vegetables are very helpful when it comes to heart health, and same with a decreased saturated fat. One thing I like to note is that sodium levels were not considered and were kept very consistent throughout the groups, and I might add relatively high with 3 grams, so it does not show a correlation between sodium and heart disease or hypertension. So that's just one thing to know about this specific study. Okay, next we've got the Cardia diet. So the Cardia diet also builds off the DASH diet. It stands for coronary artery risk development in young adults. So this was a study that I like to look into just because it did factor in demographics and other risk factors. So for example, Black men and women were more prone to suffer from hypertension regardless of their dietary modifications, while white women of higher education were more likely to consume fruits and vegetables, reducing hypertension risk, which if we're thinking of someone who maybe has more privilege to be able to pursue a higher education, they might have more access to fruits and vegetables. It might not just be I would prefer a cheeseburger over fruits and vegetables. A lot of people don't necessarily have that much control. So I think it's good to emphasize that we could all be eating the exact same thing and our bodies would all react to it differently. Okay, another thing this study showed, it did show a correlation between plant-based foods having a positive impact on reducing blood pressure, combating hypertension, and it also showed a link specifically that animal products had a negative impact, that those people who did consume more animal products had higher blood pressure, higher risk of hypertension, likely due to a lot of the factors we've listed before. So those who consumed a plant-based diet did eat less sodium, ate less saturated fat, had lower body weight, and had lower blood pressure, which means that they had a lower risk of hypertension. Once again, none of this is probably new to you as we've gone over it in the past slides, but it does show that correlation and it sticks to it strongly. Next, we're looking at phytochemicals. So what even is a phytochemical? A phytochemical can only be produced by plant-based products, so you won't see it in any animal products. These are health-promoting chemical compounds produced by plants, including antioxidants, pigments, and some vitamins. A good example that I like to throw out is something like beta-carotene. That's a provitamin, which means that it comes essentially before a vitamin. It's used to help synthesize vitamin A, so beta-carotene you'll probably see in things like sweet potatoes and carrots, and it helps develop the rods in your eyes and promote vision. So, now that we have a base work of what phytochemicals are, this study really wanted to ask the question, building off of the DASH diet, would the DASH diet still be helpful if it did not contain a lot of phytochemicals? So maybe if it were primarily low-fat dairy products with not a lot of fruits and vegetables, or if it was plant-based products that aren't high in phytochemicals, like maybe more processed plant-based foods. And it showed that without phytochemicals, even if you're eating plant-based, low-fat, you will not reap a lot of those benefits. You will not experience them to the same extent. So phytochemicals are essential to lowering blood pressure and combating hypertension. Another little fun fact going on is if you love chocolate, chocolate isn't always bad for you. So if you think of dark chocolate, if you go for like a really high cocoa content and are just mindful of fats and sugars, dark chocolate makes a great source of phytochemicals. It has flavonols in them, which produce antioxidant properties, which benefit heart health. So just a fun thing to know if you really love chocolate, now you can tell your friends that chocolate's actually good for you. Okay, so why does the plant-based diet make the best diet? It will never have beef with you. So if you don't want beef with your heart, make sure to be eating plant-based. Your heart will thank you and it will never have beef with you again. So why is this true? As we're reviewing, multiple studies have been developed in accordance with the original DASH diet, which is the first one that we looked at. And it shows that high plant-based products are good. And then low processed meats are also good. But these aren't the only factors. As we learned, we also have to be mindful of things like demographic, because those things can influence your heart health and your health as a whole without having anything to do with diet or lifestyle. And then also phytochemicals, they're great if you want to improve your heart health. Okay, tips and tricks. I know the idea of going like completely vegan, which means no animal products at all, or like even vegetarian, which just means no meat, that can be extremely tricky and daunting for a lot of people. So here are just some tips and tricks. So try meatless Mondays out if you're kind of opposed to completely cutting out meat, or even just reducing meat as a whole, maybe making it be like a side dish instead of the main dish, planning your plant-based products first. That is even still a little bit difficult for people, but if you are concerned about your heart health or health as a whole, I think that's a great solution to not make it seem so daunting and kind of just cutting it down. So you are still actively making an attempt to reduce, but you're also not kind of just jumping off the deep end. Second, rule of legs. I love to go over the rule of legs. So cows and pigs have 4 legs, turkeys and chicken, which are poultry, have 2 legs, and fish and plants have no legs. So the least amount of legs, the better, from fish and plants, turkey and chicken, cows and pigs. We know that fatty fish are high in omega-3s, which are health promoting for brain health and heart health. And then also plants, we've talked about plants this whole time. Antioxidants, phytochemicals, high fiber. Plants are great, so stick to the rule of legs if you can. And be mindful with plant-based eating. That's the third tip. Many products, like I added potato chips and fries and Oreos, they are plant-based. However, they aren't considered healthful, aren't high in phytochemicals, are high in sodium, sugar, fats, things like that. You can still enjoy those foods. I'm not saying cut them out. Like, I love a good Oreo every once in a while. Still enjoy them. Just if you're looking to maximize heart health, be considerate and consume fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and legumes. And then a little note to add on, if you're struggling to increase your fiber, fresh, frozen, and canned produce, so fruits and vegetables, they're all great options. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. They all contain fiber, all contain vitamins, minerals. So if you are on a budget, if you're struggling with storage, those all make perfectly great options. Maybe just rinse your canned fruits and vegetables. Try to get rid of some of the sodium sugar that way, because it can be stored in like syrup stuff like that. But other than that, all great sources. So why does it matter? Why are we even looking at this? Heart disease is the leading cause of death in the world, but it's also super preventable. So hypertension is just a precursor. So when you think of something like coronary artery disease, right, which is a huge killer across the world, hypertension is a precursor to that, and dietary and lifestyle modifications can be made when you have hypertension to prevent those deadly heart conditions. Unfortunately, hypertension is asymptomatic. And so, what that means is you might not even know you have hypertension unless you get tested. We also like to add on that 5% of Americans meet their fiber intake goals, and about 10% meet their fruit and vegetable intake goals. And this is not a coincidence. This is a clear link between hypertension and kind of the fruit and vegetable fiber intake. Don't make your fruit sad. I mean, I had to add crying oranges and blueberries. You don't want to make them cry like that. Make them happy and eat your fruits and vegetables, and you'll also make your heart happy. So just to recap, if you eat a lot of red meat, great ways to reduce meatless Monday, follow the rule of legs, and plan your plate around plant-based products and for meat products. If you don't eat a lot of plants, try canned and frozen fruits and vegetables. Try plant-based proteins. Beans and legumes are great sources. And then make it fun. I love to add that in. If you're not having fun with food, I mean, try to have fun with it, because the point of food is to be enjoyed. So enjoy your food, make it fun, make it plant-based if you can to help out your heart a little bit. And also, if you have serious concerns about your lifestyle habits, please speak to a medical professional. They can help you with some of those changes and make recommendations. People like a PCP or a dietitian, check them out. I'm sure there's a lot of cool people out there who'd be ready to help you. So thank you for watching. That's it for me. If you don't want beef from your heart, up those vegetables. And for resources and future information on studies, check out the links and sources referenced at the bottom of the slideshows. I added in some sources and some citations at the end, so feel free to check those out and see where a lot of this information comes from. That's it for today. Thank you so much for being here.